Welcome back. So a while ago in the hockey world, I did a misery index, and after I finished that with the NHL, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do that with other leagues? By fun, I mean just take a look at and see which fan base has the right to declare themselves the most miserable fan base in baseball, NBA, football are coming. I was going to do football today, and then I thought, no, football's in the midst of a season. Maybe I should wait till the season's over before deciding the Jets are the most miserable franchise in football. They're going to be. So the way I did this was that I figured it out by if you win a World Series, you lose points, as in you're less miserable if you win a World Series general. And a team with 100 losses or more got like special consideration for, hey, this was a miserable season. And then there were the wild card losses, the losses in the playoffs, this kind of thing to try to figure out, okay. And it's interesting because in baseball, it feels like the difference between the haves and the have nots is higher. So the team with the least reason to be miserable, and fan base's least reason to be miserable, from 2011 till 2020, shouldn't surprise anybody that it's the Boston Red Sox. Boston has had a good run over the last little while, which is overdue. The Boston Red Sox, of course, went a long time in between World Series, so the fact that now they haven't had to go so long in between World Series, if you're a Boston fan, you're happy about that. If you're not a Boston fan, you're not. So if you're a Yankees fan, you kind of wish the Yankees were 30th because that would mean some World Series. Number 29, a team that's also been very successful over the last 10 years, and this is just the last 10 years, the Giants. Now, the other thing that I used in this was I added on how long has it been since the last World Series. So when I did my hockey one for the NHL, I did how long since their last Stanley Cup. And in the case of Tampa, the reason I'm wearing Tampa Bay Lightning is because I don't have a Rays hat, but I love this Rays jersey. I had to have it when I saw it on TV. I was like, that I got to get. So the Giants I have at 29th. They won the World Series recently. Of course, the Red Sox won it recently. And when I added on the misery of how many years it's been since there was a World Series, it did change the overall standings, and I thought it made it a little more fair to where I thought these teams should be. At number 28, your current World Series champions. So the Dodgers end up at 28th. If not for the World Series, if I had done this from 2010 till 2019, they likely would have been right down about here. They would not have been at the end. But the thing is, having won so many division titles, it's not like they garnered a ton of misery votes and misery points. And of course, we'll always have that debate about, is it more miserable to see your team lose 105 games or to see your team get one game away from a World Series and lose? Well, I think that your team being that close to the World Series means you've had more reason to be jubilant than the fan of a team that won 46 games that year. Number 27 on this board, St. Louis. The Cardinals. The Cardinals are a very well run team. They don't seem to be down for that long. I have no problem with doing another misery index for other decades as well, as the offseason moves along, and just see where teams end up in different decades. But I have St. Louis in 27th. Again, pretty solid decade for them. Number 26. You want to talk about teams that went a long time in between championships. How about the Cubs? The Cubs, I have a funny feeling that if I measured the last 100 plus years and put all those numbers together, Cubs are going to end up probably right about here. Right about there. It was a long time, long time that we heard about the curses over the Cubs. Various curses, much the same as Boston, various curses there. But it was nice to see that the Chicago Cubs finally kicked that off. And so we've got World Series champions all the way through here at the bottom so far. And that, I think, is a good indicator that this system works. Number 25, also a team that won a World Series in the last 10 years, and that's the Washington Nationals. So the Nationals have more reason, their fans have more reason to be upset than the fans of these teams. Again, I think that's fair. The Nationals have had some lean years as well over the last decade. So those lean years definitely caused them to rack up some more points than the ones that are beneath them. Now, number 24, you know, it's the Astros. And what's interesting to me is that I debated about this, and I thought, Astros fans have to feel kind of like that World Series championship now is tainted, and maybe I shouldn't count full points from it. I did. I counted the points from that World Series the same as any other because in that moment, of course, it's jubilation. Now, of course, we look at it through a different lens. There's a lot of debate about that. It's not going to get taken away from them. but there'll always be, for fans, that asterisk next to that World Series. So the Astros I have at 24, and hopefully, as the years go by, if run properly, they can win another World Series and change the narrative. Because the narrative right now, not so positive for the Houston Astros. Number 23, Kansas City. Now, if not for their World Series win during the last decade, Kansas City would have a much lower rating. Kansas City, they put together a really good young team. They won a World Series, and then it just falls apart after that. So they end up ahead of everybody else down here that have won World Series over the last 10 years. But they're still beneath the teams that didn't win a World Series. And that's where that point total that I assigned to World Series winners seems to have the effect that it's supposed to. Which is that if you've won a championship, your fan base can't really say, well, in the last 10 years, we've had real reasons to be miserable. You won a championship. You can't. Number 22, the Yankees. The Yankees are always in there. The Yankees are always the team I'm worried about. The Yankees spend a ton of money. And it's proof that you can't buy a championship. And yet when they win, we say, well, they bought that championship. So when they lose, we say, well, they didn't buy it this year. And then when they win, we say they bought it. In reality, it's a combination in baseball between spending the money and having the money spent properly. You look at the World Series this year between Tampa Bay and the Dodgers. And the Dodgers, their payroll was a little bit higher than Tampa's. And I'm being sarcastic. It was a lot more. And yet, the fact that Tampa Bay is number 21 on this list, and that they're as low down on the misery index as they are, it says a lot about how well run the Rays really are, and how they're able to put it together in a shoestring budget. Very much like the Oakland A's out west, where shoestring budget, the difference is they got to the World Series, they got it done, and the Dodgers just had the depth to beat them. If Tampa Bay wasn't striking out as much as they did, if they could have hit off Kershaw in the World Series, we might be talking about them being World Series champions. They might be down here in the misery index, and the Dodgers, without the points with that World Series win, would have been probably up and about here on the list. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough time if you're a Rays fan, and yet at the same time you have to be kind of proud of them because they managed to win despite their budget. Number 20 is the A's. So Oakland, they do pretty well during the regular season. And you go, how are they going to blow this in the playoffs? Oh, there you go. There you go. That's how they blew it. Wild card game, and they're out. All right. Nope. They didn't blow it there. Nope. There they go. They blew it in the division series. Having picked up on and started cheering for the A's after the Canseco-Maguire era, because I couldn't stand Jose Canseco. Wasn't a big fan of Maguire either. And just the ego that seemed to exist with that Oakland team. But now they're a team that's again on a tight budget. We know that from the Moneyball movie, right? And yet they're not quite able to get over the hump in the playoffs. Speaking of which, at number 19 are the Braves. Nice run by the Braves this year. They look pretty good, and then just couldn't quite get over the hump this year themselves either. But you get the feeling that the Braves, with the right moves this offseason, they could get it done. We may be talking about an Atlanta Braves team a couple years from now that wins a World Series, or at least gets there, like the Rays did. And we'll see whether or not they can get over the hump themselves. But the Braves, number 19, not towards the bottom, not towards the top, more towards the middle. Number 18, also towards the middle, is Cleveland. Cleveland, it's been a long time, of course, since there was any kind of championship for Cleveland. So while they've made the playoffs and they've done pretty well as a team over the last 10 years in spots, well enough that they're not higher up on this board, they also don't have a World Series championship. So we'll see if that happens anytime soon, right? Again, I like parity. I like seeing new teams win championships. I actually like that the Dodgers won their first since 1988. So maybe Cleveland can be the next one, joining a team like Boston and Chicago as a team that looks like maybe they're jinxed. They just can't be, they're not run very well, and then they win a championship. Number 17, Texas. Texas has had some nice runs. Texas has had some good years. They've had a playoff team. They've gone on some nice little runs along the way. Couldn't quite get over the hump when they needed to. So Texas is, and once we get into the top 10, you'll see why Texas isn't higher up. Texas, no championships for Texas, but they didn't build up enough misery points overall over the last 10 years to find themselves ahead of 16 other teams. So for Texas, they're in that category too of teams that would be nice to see them get that off their backs. Number 16, Arizona. Now, Arizona did win a championship in 2001. They did. And so that's good. And yet it didn't factor into this because, of course, this is just from 2011 till 2020, till the playoffs had just finished. Arizona, though, right around the middle. So if you feel like, I think I'm more miserable than 13 other fan bases, according to my numbers, you're correct. If you think, I'm not quite as miserable as 15 others, numbers would say you're probably correct. You're right in that middle, along with the Reds. The Reds at 15, just right around the middle. Again, the Reds, they look good some of those years. They get close, and then just it's about getting over that hump, getting over that challenge. And again, old enough to remember Johnny Bench. I do remember Johnny Bench. It would be nice to see a championship with the Reds. And I wouldn't have said that back in the 80s, but as I've been a Bengals fan in football for decades, I have a certain affinity for the Reds as well. Cincinnati, not considered to be as large of a metropolitan area as, say, New York or LA. It would be nice to see Cincinnati get a championship. Just saying, between the Bengals and the Reds are closer. At some point, I'm going to do a misery index as well with cities, where we get into which cities' fan bases have the most reason to maybe be a little bit ticked off. And I'll use the 4 major sports for that. I can do like Canadian and American cities for that too. So yeah, which city has the right to be more? I would think that Cincinnati would probably be pretty high up on that. Number 14, Toronto. I really like what Toronto's doing. I think that Toronto is on the verge of being not just a team that ends up playing against Tampa and being outclassed as they were, but a team that actually could contend. I like their positional players. I like some of the moves they've made. I think Ryu is a good addition for them. And now it's a matter of just filling out that roster, getting that bullpen up to where you need it, and making sure you have 4 quality starters. Baseball used to be 5 quality starters. Now it seems like 4 quality starters and then just an opener guy that you're just going to rotate through 5 or 6 pitchers that day. So the Jays, it's just a matter of adding that depth. But again, they did have in the last 10 years, may not feel like it, but the bat flip was within the last decade. And it just doesn't feel like it, does it? Number 13, Milwaukee. Now, Milwaukee's flirted with respectability too. And Milwaukee's had their opportunities over the last, I'll say, 5 years, just coming up short. And so we'll see whether or not the Brewers can head back in the right direction. I think they can. I do. Because, again, I like parity. And how many of these teams have baseballs in their actual logo? You got the Rays, Brewers, Blue Jays, Rangers, Giants. There are a lot of teams that have pucks in their logos in hockey. What about footballs in the football logos? That's kind of weird, isn't it? It's like they got to tell people, hey, by the way, we're a baseball team, just in case you didn't know. Just in case you thought Texas Rangers was just some kind of a Chuck Norris kind of reference. Anyways, all right, so the Brewers I have at 13. At number 12, also a baseball, the Minnesota Twins. Twins fans will nod, and then they're going to go, wait a minute, we can't win a playoff game. Right. But the Twins, for the most part, haven't been miserably bad over the last decade. They've had a couple of miserably bad seasons, which is why they're ahead of 18 other teams. But there's misery above them with the other 11 that I can't argue with. That does show that, again, there are certain teams in Major League Baseball that have been miserable for quite a while. Speaking of which, a team that might be making a turn soon is at number 11, and that's the Mets. Yes, the Mets are number 11 on the board. I was kind of surprised the Mets weren't higher. I even had to kind of go back and take a second look. Like, did I miss something with the Mets? Nope. The Mets are number 11. It just feels like they should be number 1. And I don't know how much of that has to do with the fact they're in New York, so they get more attention. I don't know how much it has to do with the fact that they're always compared to the Yankees, which is not a good comparison most of the time. Or the fact that the Mets have at times given contracts to guys that have backfired. So yeah, the Mets, now with new ownership, I think things should get better for them. Smart ownership can make a big difference. And now we're into the top 10. And this is where there's definitely some teams that have had a long dry spell, starting with the Colorado Rockies. Now, I adopted the Colorado Rockies ages ago as this is an underdog team. I'm gonna root for the Rockies, and it just doesn't work. Me rooting for a team doesn't work. So whenever anybody on the Hockey Channel says you should root for my team, I'm thinking you don't know what you're asking of me. You don't know what that'll do to your team. You don't know what my fandom does. Just ask the Chargers. They moved. They moved from San Diego to LA going, this will piss them off. And it did. And yet, I still ended up cheering for the Chargers, and they still suck. So, the Rockies are top 10 in the misery index. Number 9, the Angels. The Angels have become the team that we feel bad for Mike Trout playing for. As much as we talk about the Angels and their misfires, it all comes down to, is the best player in baseball, who is arguably Mike Trout, and we can make arguments about whether it is or isn't Trout, is he stuck on a really bad team for a long time to come? Yeah, probably. And for Trout, I do kind of feel bad. The Angels have had some really, really poor seasons along the way, and there's always been that expectation that this is what's going to get him over the top. It just doesn't work. Number 8, Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's had a couple of good years in the last decade, but in general, the Pirates have been, well, they're the Pirates. And I found myself when I was buying baseball jerseys and figuring out what I wanted to wear baseball-wise, I do like the black Pirates jersey. Their current jersey is actually really sharp. It's nice, it's clean, it's not, it's a nice, clean, just a black jersey with the Pittsburgh logo on the front. It's nice. I like it, and yet the team that wears it hasn't won a championship in a long time. So I'd like to see that change, which is weird because everybody from the Hockey Channel will go, wait, you hate Pittsburgh? No, just the Penguins. I don't hate the Steelers. I'm supposed to because I'm a Bengals fan, right? And I don't hate the Pirates. It's just the Penguins, for whatever reason, get under my skin. It's something that I've dealt with since the 90s, but the Pirates, not as much. And yet, back in the 80s, I wasn't a big fan of the Pirates either. And along the way, that kind of changed. I always kind of lean towards the Steelers, but not so much the Penguins. Number 7, Phillies. It's amazing looking at the Phillies over the last decade and realizing, wow, it's been a long time since these guys were a contender. And along the way, you'll see a guy sign with the Phillies, and you'll go, hey, so that's going to turn things around, and then, nope. And so the Phillies find themselves at number 7 on this list. And this is when I, as a baseball fan, start looking at this list and go, well, that makes sense. Number 6, I'm surprised these guys aren't number 1 as well, though. That's the Orioles. I really kind of expected the Orioles to end up maybe being number 1. It just feels like the Orioles are a joke. And it's too bad because there have been times where the Blue Jays were right down there with them, but it always felt like anytime the Jays played against the Orioles, well, they should beat the Orioles. I know that the Jays have lost 18 out of their last 21, but they should still be able to beat the Orioles, right? That's a problem. It's a problem when your team is the one that everybody should be able to defeat. And so I was surprised that the Orioles weren't higher. I was surprised they weren't ahead of number 5, the Chicago White Sox. They also went a long time in between World Series, and now it's starting to feel like the team's kind of meandering, and we'll see whether or not they can get back in the hunt soon. But yeah, for the White Sox, seeing them at number 5 honestly kind of surprised me. I did not expect them to be that high up on the board. Which brings me to number 4. I was kind of surprised these guys were number 4, and that's the Marlins. And that is the biggest logo that I have of the Marlins. So I know it's smaller than the other ones. I went looking. This is the only logo I have of theirs that's as big as it is. I don't know. Maybe they don't feel like they have to make a giant logo. They don't feel insecure, so they're more secure with themselves. Or they just want to kind of fade into the background and not think about it. And the Miami was an interesting team this year in that they had a pretty good regular season, and they rallied around the idea that people thought the team was crap and they were going to prove people wrong, and they did. But still, on this overall misery list, they ended up number 4. So in the misery index, they end up being number 4. Number 3, and I agree with this one, and wholeheartedly, it's the San Diego Padres. This year, it was supposed to get better, and it kind of did, and then it didn't. Once the playoffs roll around, it's not a matter of whether or not San Diego's going to lose. It's how are they going to lose this time? And they did it again. And I understand there are people who will tell me, hey, things are going to get better. San Diego's got a good roster. There's a lot of reasons to think San Diego's going to turn this around. Yeah, And I've heard that before with the Padres. So I want to be right there and I want to agree, but this is a team that's never won a championship. That definitely caused them to be much higher on the misery index than others. And I can't get there. Number 2, embarrassingly number 2, is the Detroit Tigers. And I say embarrassingly, not because of a dislike for the Detroit Tigers, but because I remember Alan Trammell. I remember Jack Morris. I remember when this team was excellent. When the idea of, well, which team has run really, really well, you would start with the Tigers. You would look at the Tigers at certain points and say, that team has run really, really well. And to see how far they've dropped and how miserable it got, and how miserable it still kind of is, it's a shame because there's definitely a built-in strong fan base there for the Tigers. It's a great history for the Tigers, and it's just a matter of them finding their legs again. And I'm not sure how they're going to do it. Genuinely not sure how they're going to do this. But they end up being number 2. So who's number 1? You guys know who number 1 is, right? Which team's not on the board? Number 1 is Seattle Mariners. So for Seattle fans, you're looking at this and going, wow, it really is. We really are number 1, aren't we? Yep. And that's as close to number 1 as you're going to see a Mariners team on any list that doesn't involve, well, it's the only list you'll see the number 1 on, right? And this is an ongoing theme. I remember, I want to say it was 2 years ago that I was watching local coverage, and they were like, Mariners have brought in these guys, and things are going to get better, and the Mariners are going to be good this year, and they kept going on about how, this edition and that edition, this is going to be great. And I laughed and said, yeah, right. And I was right. It is an ongoing theme that the Mariners have been disappointments to their fan base, and they ended up being number 1. And I'm going to say this straight out. From 1 through 3, they're not separated by that much. The separation from 1 through 3 is not that high. But I totally agree with them in that order. So there you go. The misery index from 2011 till 2020 of Major League Baseball. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.